Welcome to my channel, The Magic of Java. This is an extract from my first book, The Green Queen from Java. It's a novel, it's a tale, a yarn intended to entertain you. Yes, it does reflect my experience of falling in love with Indonesia, my experience of falling in love with an Indonesian lady, and my increasing awareness of the paranormal and black magic. Or some might like to say my descent into madness, but it is just a novel. Any resemblance to real people is completely unintentional. Yes, it's based on my experience, so yes, it's based on people I've met and know, but amalgams or caricatures of them. I do mention real people and real life celebrities and hope that they, along with anybody who believes they've identified themselves, will forgive me. Bertrand, a somewhat famous French fashion entrepreneur, appeared before Maddie in FTs. A little older than her already elderly husband, but different in every respect. Very stylish and courteous, above all a man she could depend on. Of course, Bertrand could not believe his luck. A new and seemingly young woman, the most beautiful that night in FTs, and if not a virgin, then very nearly. He certainly could not comprehend that she was already a mother of two. Unlike the other girls, she simply smiled and never asked for money. Maddie was taken to a new world by Bertrand, frequently paying for her to fly Garuda first class to Bali and stay in $1,000 a night villas. I used US dollars throughout rather than rupiah or sterling, as the rupiah has such low exchange rates that the sheer size of the numbers would confuse international readers, and still does me on occasions. As the rupiah somewhat follows the value, it is the most dependable reference. Despite Maddie's father being from Bali, none of her family had ever visited the island, nor were likely to. In common with most Indonesians, Maddie loves Bali. It's like visiting another country. She'd only seen on television, but she's able to communicate in Bahasa with a Balinese, who she found to be like the Javanese, but more tolerant and less judgmental. When making love, Bertrand would ask Maddie to say yes when she enjoyed what he was doing. What did he mean? Was she expected to enjoy what men did to her? Of course she was young and excited by men and intimacy, but how could she be expected to enjoy having men's pisang, bananas, forced inside her? Bertrand regularly insisted on demeaning Maddie by making her make a shape like an animal and entering her from behind. Maddie was disgusted by the experience, but in every other respect Bertrand was kind. Although Bertrand had hurt her badly one night, as he got carried away with his love-making, he'd pulled her hair and even seemed to try to strangle her. Nevertheless, one of the few words in English Maddie knew was yes. So when making love, she smiled and cried out, "Yes!" Wasn't that what Bertrand wanted? Bertrand later took Maddie to Hong Kong and Macau, which she loved, and Guangzhou in China, which he hated. In Guangzhou, people spat in the street and had pushed her while shopping. How could they? Had they no dignity? Northern European visitors to Indonesia might also be tempted to push Indonesians, who walk in slow motion, especially when shopping in our local Lotte supermarket. They navigate the aisles as if every detergent had some deep, mystical meaning. But Maddie is not so prone to this affliction. Despite 1 in 10 Indonesians being of some Chinese origin, pribumis, a term outlawed by President Habibie, but still used pejoratively, which I most certainly am not doing, and particularly the Javanese, struggle to accept the Chinese. Officially, only 1 in 25 Indonesians are described as Chinese, as in spite of having a Chinese grandmother, somebody like Maddie would never be considered Chinese, even though regularly being mistaken for Chinese. Such definitions are important, as Chinese Indonesians are excluded from many areas of life in Indonesia. Most strikingly, they are never seen in the uniformed services. Furthermore, the Chinese are often prevented from owning land, and therefore their own homes, although in truth, the Sultan has the ultimate title for all land in Java. Of course, racism and nationalism are often manipulated by politicians are one explanation, but there is also a complete cultural class, especially with the Singapore and mainland Chinese. The same is true for Australians, a nation with whom Indonesia seems to be in a constant diplomatic crisis. It probably comes as a surprise to Westerners, but many Indonesians, including Made, dislike Chinese food, but absolutely love Indian food. Of course, it's an oversimplification, ignoring regional variations and the many Chinese dishes adopted by Indonesians, but only proffered to inform you, the reader. Bertrand showed Maddie off to his business contacts and wanted to buy clothing for her, most of which she hated and would never dream of wearing in Indonesia. She tells a story of being in Hong Kong and seeing girls waiting on streets for buses, even speaking for a considerable time to male passengers. But neither the girls nor the male passengers ever got on a bus. It took a long while for Bertrand to explain what was happening, and even then it wasn't something she could really comprehend. Maddie had never really known her father, so Bertrand's insistence that she behave in certain ways, like sitting up straight and eating with a knife and a fork, were not unwelcome. Indeed, just like her nene had found, Maddie was a willing ewer for new knowledge, effortlessly picking up French etiquette. This Professor Higgins became a lover, father and teacher all in one. He paid for her to learn English, despite his English being far from perfect, and as a result of his failing hearing, Maddie had to write messages to him rather than speak. If Maddie had imperfections, they were that her teeth were slightly protruding, her eyes a little crossed, and she spoke with a slight lisp. Bertrand paid for her to have her teeth fixed, which necessitated wearing uncomfortable braces for years. She even had them when we first met. Thankfully, he never turned his attention to the other imperfections, which actually added to her allure. Less welcome was Bertrand's eating and fitness regime. Bertrand had worked as a Club Med rep and ski instructor, and followed an almost military fitness regime, a little of which he attempted to impose on Maddie. He would wear a black yoga outfit on the beach and extol its benefits while striking slow poses to a self-conscious Maddie. Bertrand, of course, had no idea how yoga had been incorporated into Kejauhan prayers, and that Maddie understood the deep practices and meanings of his comical New England abstraction. But then neither did Maddie realise that what Bertrand was doing in his strange black outfit had any relationship to what her nene had taught her. She was rarely allowed to eat Indonesian food, although in ordering fusion food, Bertrand probably thought he was pleasing her, and only to eat at certain times without snacking on Crispies, so much a part of Indonesia's food culture. Bizarrely for the tropics, she was not allowed to drink water during the night. Bertrand made Maddie walk everywhere, something Indonesians only do when they have to, and rarely in the midday sun. Dogs are rare in Islamic areas, less so in Hindu Bali, but the reference is too obvious to make. In any case, Bertrand was French. In fact, Indonesians walk less than any other nation on the earth. I once walked around 1 kilometre in Jogja with Titi and Widati. The next day, both complained of pains in their legs. But Bertrand made Maddie walk, including following him around a golf course as he played. This must have been demeaning, as courses employ scantily dressed caddies, and is not considered an entirely reputable vocation. But the biggest shame came from being forced to wear a bikini he had bought for her. She was fine wearing shorts and short tops, but no Muslim should ever show herself in a bikini. Maddie had to stay on the beach all day, sometimes in full view of other Muslims, despite looking fabulous in this carefully chosen black two-piece. He also took many photos of her sleeping naked, which to her shame he would send to her. Embarrassed and frequently bored, Maddie's naughty side would come to the fore, and she would sneak off from the beach to buy instant noodles or rice, essential for the health of Javanese. Bertrand was old and wise. Why didn't he understand that rice is life? Bertrand was very kind, and that's all that mattered to Maddie. In fact, as the years went on, she fell in love with him, more as a surrogate father than a lover, but began to relax and enjoy their lovemaking. One night, she had her first orgasm. Bertrand was so happy and proud. Yes, she'd enjoyed it, but pleasing Bertrand was the most important thing in her life. After all, Maddie is all woman, with an abundance of love to give. Slowly, Maddie seemed to be reaching a goal. So when Bertrand promised to buy a house for them, she assumed that he must plan to marry her, as in Jakarta or Sunda, unmarried Indonesian Muslims would not be accepted by the community. A nikah siri was fine, as it's all her family had ever known. That he was already married was not a problem. Her mother had to share a husband, as did she, with Prama. Not that that mattered to her one bit. She knew that for the price of a 2-week stay in Bali, Bertrand could buy her a home of her own. They went on numerous visits to properties in Bali, South Jakarta, Bogor, Puncak. Bertrand would arrive with his driver at Prama's house. He would even wave at Prama and attempt conversation in broken English, which Prama didn't understand at all. Maddie had never told Bertrand that she was married, and he'd wrongly assumed this elderly man to be her relative or her landlord. This went on for many years, but Bertrand never kept his promise, and Maddie never got a house. Although upset, it really didn't matter to Maddie, apart from the loss of face, as a rich bule had spoken about buying houses from her neighbours, and never followed up on his commitment. But in Indonesia, all bules are believed to be incredibly rich, so his actual wealth was not apparent to Maddie, nor anyone else he met. Her love for and dependency on Bertrand grew, especially after her mother died. After some 5 years, Bertrand sent Maddie a message saying that his wife had given him an ultimatum and their relationship had to end. However, this was not entirely unexpected. Maddie had overheard him talking to a taxi driver on the way to the airport in Bali, inquiring if it was permissible to bring another girl to the villa. Had it not been for her daughters, Maddie would have taken her life immediately. That is, if she could, because of course she had already failed on 2 previous attempts. As it was, Maddie took herself to her room and cried for 3 months. Despite their closeness and obvious love for their mother, there was nothing Wiradhati and Titi could do. In fact, when Maddie wants to do something strongly enough, there is nothing anyone can do, and she just wanted to cry and cry and cry some more. This Eliza Doolittle emerged from her room changed, much harder than before. Nothing like as hard as the other girls in FTs who'd met many Bertrands, but her innocence had gone. She needed to become more like the other girls, and entered FTs in her very best clothes and makeup, as only she knew how. But she crumbled. This was not Maddie. Bertrand had introduced this good Muslim girl to alcohol, It really didn't matter, as Indonesian Muslims used to be fairly tolerant. Maddie had drunk white wine with dinner, which gave her such a bad headache she had to refuse Bertrand's demands that night. But slowly she learnt that whilst maybe not to enjoy wine, at least she could drink it. So when she got to FT's, she ordered white wine and cried at the bar drinking it. Later, one of Maddie's friends introduced her to tequila. The first 2 times it sent her to sleep on the sofa, necessitating security to help her into a Silver Note taxi, the upmarket Blue Note brand, using black Mercedes. However, on the 3rd time it was brilliant. She was alive and awake and wanted to dance, completely forgetting about Bertrand, at least while the tequila was flowing. In fact, it flowed for 3 months, depleting the glass of its decoration, which may have been enough to buy a small house, but Maddie was too full of remorse to think straight. Tequila makes Maddie gregarious, even a different person. She dances with abandon and flirts with all the men in FT's, causing other boyfriends to become jealous and angry. But I am simply amused at how Maddie takes on the character of Nera Rorokedal, the Queen of the Southern Seas. By the time I met Maddie, she could drink more than most men, despite seemingly having no habit or craving. Men in FT's would buy Maddie bottles of tequila, and the management realised what an asset she was in getting men to part with the $200 they charged for a bottle. Of course, the men expected more than conversations, and sometimes they got it. But Maddie was looking for a husband, not really money. Actually, she was looking for love. However, the distinction between love, money and a husband were never clear to her, as they aren't to most Indonesian girls. In fact, Maddie was given a lot of foreign currency simply for speaking to lonely men and sorting out small problems during their stay in Jakarta. All men believe Maddie to be beautiful and sexy, failing to recognise that it is her smile and dancing eyes that enchant them. She simply has the ability to cheer up anyone who is slightly unhappy or merely lonely. That's not to say that Melly never felt the need for bleep and never enjoyed it anymore. Sometimes she did. After all, she was in her prime, an old woman. But rarely could these Western males contain themselves long enough to satisfy her. Indeed, she tells of remarkable regularity in which they would involuntarily discharge in the shower or on her leg. You may see this as a turning point in Maddie's life, but what she was doing was no more than most girls in the UK at weekends. Indeed, this period lasted for months rather than years, and Maddie was still somewhat inexperienced in lovemaking. When a Western male gives some money to a girl in FT's, he sees it as the end of a transaction, whereas the girls see it as the beginning of a commitment. Even those girls who understand that Western males are unlikely to marry them and move to Indonesia are still looking for boyfriends who will send them a monthly allowance. Of course, such relationships are open to abuse by either side, but an equal number are honest, although almost always they eventually break down. Granted, it's true that some girls in FT's have become addicted to meth, crystal meth or heroin, bought in a now closed stadium nightclub in North Jakarta, and they have lost most of their principles. FT's nevertheless remains upmarket, with all the girls expected to wear expensive looking shoes and clothing. It is probably most accurate to see FT's as a marketplace for mistresses seeking sugar daddies. Indeed, a scurrilous rumour exists that the Duke of York threw a tantrum, refusing his nightly Ovaltine when his minders informed him that it was too great a security risk for him to attend. I'm sure that this is simply a malicious rumour, and His Royal Highness had never heard of FT's nor even visited Jakarta. But there's also a number of wealthy girls who simply go there for fun, Neither their boyfriends nor they would believe me that they have more disposable income than their boyfriends, but this is often the case. Of course, all the girls in FTs believe bullets to be unimaginably rich and would be horrified of the reality of life in the West, whilst all bullets believe the girls in FTs to live in abject poverty. Why else would they be there? This completely misses how chauvinism and sexism combine in Indonesia, disenfranchising all but the best educated women. Such is the chauvinism that Garuda executives were convicted of pimping out their stewardesses. The girls spend this pin money on makeup, clothes, well-tailored copies of the latest European designs imported from Hong Kong, jewellery, especially gold, which can be readily turned into cash when their money runs out, plastic surgery in Bangkok to enlarge and straighten their flat noses, paradoxically rendering them less desirable to the men they seek to attract. But the biggest proportion of their additional wealth is given to a dukan, or shaman, to help them find Mr. Right, without really considering what Mr. Right should be like. All the girls are completely unaware of the fate which awaits them should they marry a bule who then moves to Indonesia. They believe they can rise above their past without realising that it is their futures that are so dangerous. The main exception to my classification being the daughters of Jakarta's super rich, who occasionally visit FTs and whose behaviour may seem indistinguishable, apart from the noise they make in spending their parents' money and in their obsession with status when on the pull. A part of the confusion is that Indonesians would use more than a single word to describe what we call prostitution, and the definition would never include paying for it. Prostitutes are known as pekerja bleep commercial or commercial bleep workers. These are people whose sole income comes from bleep and they have little or no choice in whom they have it with. Nevertheless, the income from such work confers status on a girl with no education and is often seen as a positive career choice, which diminishes rapidly with age, along with their ability to earn foreign currency. A good many in FTs, even those addicted to drugs, would be known as kupu-kupu malam, night butterflies, the rural equivalent being gadis malam, and never PSK. Many people pay for bleep in Indonesia. Even some wives will charge their husbands, not with a promise of a new dress or other item, but actual cash. This especially occurs when a husband returns to the desa from working away, their pockets loaded with money they have not been able to send home. To a Muslim, bleep outside marriage and drinking alcohol are haram, so accepting money for it is a Western boundary of no significance. But this is completely misunderstood by their Western boyfriends. Not all girls who accept money from foreigners are prostitutes, just as not all people offering advice are experts. Once Mally has confided in people that she visited bars and dated Western men while still married, there is absolutely no shame in saying that she sometimes accepted money from these men. In fact, to most Indonesians, this would be regarded as the only explanation for dating foreigners. Nevertheless, Maddie always prayed and said sorry to Allah before going out, and frequently cried to herself about what had become of her life. Effortlessly, and without wanting to, Maddie emerged as Ratu, or Queen of FTs. Although less complimentary, she was also nicknamed Ratu Tequila. Many of the girls in FTs are from Java, especially Indonesia's second city Surabaya, but none seem to manage to radiate the Kraton Priari like Maddie. It's not something she puts on or even aspires to. It's just how Maddie is, somehow above all around her, without ever feeling that she is. Maddie would never swear nor speak politely, and all the other girls not knew not to do the same in her company. This must have been a part of her rise to priori. As Donald McGill would put it, she's a nice girl and she only swears when it slips out. Another was if hungry, she would eat in a hotel restaurant, as she had so often with Bertrand, not the warren behind the hotel with the other girls. She would always take a silver note taxi, never a cheaper taxi or ojek motorcycle taxi as the others did, although she was and is perfectly happy to be friends with the other girls. As a result of this, all staff members, including security, would make a big fuss of Maddie, treating her like the priori she had become. But again, nothing was for show. It is simply the way Maddie is. Just maybe the Javanese girls also recognised something in Maddie that had started to reveal itself to me as this story unfolded. I understand there are offices in India with pin-ups of Maddie in them. Not that she would ever choose an Indian suitor. No, Maddie's preference was for European males, followed by North Americans, and finally Australians, who were the Samut ants of FTs. This is typical of girls in FTs, with each having a preference for one nationality or another, and dressing accordingly. But Maddie is Maddie, and whilst alike the fantasies of the males who see her from afar, she is a real woman, not an Indian's wet dream. It was not long before Steve walked into FT's, a very tall British national who had settled in Perth. Neither handsome nor stylish, but kind, although emotionally little more stable than Maddie had now become. Despite his obvious flaws, Steve immediately seemed to understand what Maddie wanted and would rent luxury apartments in Jakarta, installing Maddie as his living wife, which is no taboo in the anonymous international areas of Jakarta, although Maddie never missed a daily visit to her daughters. Maddie's love for Bertrand was transposed onto Steve, but all Steve could do to cheer Maddie up was take her shopping for clothes, and above all, shoes and handbags, which she hoarded, having spent her early years with neither. Maddie and Steve's favourite place to shop was Mall Ambassador, with a good collection of copies of the latest European fashions, shoes and handbags. Mall Ambassador is one of Jakarta's most enduring popular malls, although like Block M, more resembles a UK market. It is particularly popular with Manado East shoppers, as it contains a large evangelical church, or maybe it is because it's one of the only malls in Jakarta where fruit bats, dogs and cats are served in a food hall. As is common in Jakarta, outside Mall Ambassador, one has to pay a local boy with some small change to find a taxi, or shelter you with an umbrella when it rains. Steve would refuse to pay and frequently lost his temper, something Indonesians never do, and which would make Maddie so embarrassed. But surely Steve knew Maddie needed a husband, though he never asked, until years later when it was too late. In fact, Steve had become somewhat immature in dealing with his relationship with Maddie, moving from rage and bad behaviour to remorse and even breaking down in tears. This is all so Indonesian and causes Maddie extreme embarrassment. In fairness to Steve, as Maddie's boyfriend, he had over the years sent her quite a lot of Australian dollars, at least in Indonesian terms, and probably felt that Maddie accepting them represented something of a long-term commitment. Bertrand is still in contact with Maddie, but there is a slow realisation that while she might have been his only Eliza, there were many Maddies throughout the Asian countries which formed his supply chain. He is now old and retired, and seems to want to meet her for one last time, maybe to give her some money, which he has hidden in banks in Hong Kong, where he keeps wanting to take her. But Maddie's wounds never fully healed, and she has no intention of allowing this elderly man to play with her any further. Well, I hope you enjoyed this chapter. By all means, feel free to comment on it, including criticism, as that's the only way I can improve. Now, I really do hate it when channels keep badgering you to subscribe for them. But I suppose it does tell you when I'm going to post new chapters. I'm aiming to do this every week to 10 days, so it might be a good idea to subscribe if you want to. But thank you again for listening.